I am extremely excited to introduce you all to Roberto Blain, who I met last summer in a writing program, in a writing workshop, and I became fascinated with his way of threading the needle in addressing corporate executives, the business setting, and introducing some of the most mind-blowing concepts that you would typically think a business leader would be unprepared for. So I'd like to start with your own experiences of what threading the needle really means and what you think is achievable in the enterprise and the corporate context when it comes to culture change and transformation, which are not really understood.
Got it. Okay. First of all, thank you for David for inviting me, and hello everybody. It's nice to meet you all, even though I can't see you or know who you are, but I'm happy to chat a little bit about these things. So, in terms of my background, I have been in the field of talent management, HR, organizational transformation, and culture change for about 40 years. And in that time, there has been quite an evolution of what we might call transformational programs, modalities, change in the business setting. And I've worked for some of the top organizations in the country, huge banks on Wall Street. I spent years at Disney, at Warner Brothers. I've worked for insurance companies in Chicago. So I've pretty much seen a cross section of industries and organizational cultures, and pretty much they all operate the same way. You know, as creative as Disney is in certain ways, there's just as much creativity at, Lawrence Livermore Laboratories in different ways. But there is if you will, an evolution of what you might call corporate consciousness that has been going on over the last, I would say, 30 years. So in the 1990s, what was going on in corporate America was the movement that happened here. And, prior to that, there were the quality circles that we all know about that happened in Japan and in the aerospace industries, where they really started getting, co-creative teams and so on and so forth. And that evolved. And then in the 90s, re-engineering kicked in. That was the buzzword, re-engineering. And organizations started looking at how do we re-engineer our organizations so that they're highly efficient, effective, productive. And what that looked like was more in terms of process redesign, Six Sigma, et cetera, et cetera. It's not exactly what I would call high culture change or transformational modalities. It was pretty linear. And so around the year 2005, I read a study of spirituality at work. And spirituality at work at that time was being defined as meaning at work, people finding their purpose, organizations being connected to a purpose larger than, the profit center. And what happened was that this study indicated that between 2000 and 2005, there was, I don't know if it was an 1,000 or 10,000% jump jump of companies that actually started doing more spirituality in the workplace type work. And, when I think about that, I attribute it to the fact that around the late 90s, year 2000, the movie The Secret came out, which started to introduce the world to law of attraction. And then the movie What the Bleep, which was in a similar vein. People were doing yoga, Eastern and Western traditions were starting to, there was a confluence of them. And people started, there was just an evolution happening. Now, I want to step back and talk a little bit about that evolution on a more sort of cosmic scale. Okay. And different people have different versions of the story. I'm not saying that this is the right one, but I'm currently working with a team that is building new modalities to move us from what we might call third dimensional reality to fifth dimensional reality. So many of you have probably heard that we live in a multi-dimensional world, universe. And so if you are interested in this and you do some Google research, you'll see that there's a difference between what's actually going on in third dimensional reality, fourth, fifth, sixth. So the team that I'm working on is particularly interested in looking at as we transition from third dimensional reality to fifth dimensional reality, and I'll say more about what the concomitants of that are. What are the competencies that you need? Because the way we see it, technology has advanced to a very, very high degree. So you could say that technology, the sciences, technology, computers, all that is at like 10.0. But the human mind, in terms of mental models, is still at 2.0. And so there are new modalities that are coming in that are actually ramping up and accelerating the human mind's ability to produce results in new and different ways through visioning, the competencies of intuition, et cetera, et cetera. So, we had soft skills, we had hard skills, and now we have super skills. Okay. And so that transition from 3D to 5D is nothing new. And I'll step back for a minute to tell you a story, or not a story, but a factoid about this sort of trajectory that we're on and why there's so much chaos going on right now on the planet. Dial back the clock about 500 years ago, and Andean shamans in the Andean, in Peru and the Andean region predicted that there was going to be a sort of shift happening on the planet over the next 500 years. Now they have an analogy, or I don't know if it's the right word, analogy or metaphor, of the eagle and the condor. And the condor represents science, the masculine principle, sort of the assertive energies, and that's considered more of the North and the West, whereas the condor is more intuitive, more the feminine principle, receptive, good, effective listening, et cetera, et cetera. And that is more typical of the South America, the East. And so, and the globe is literally divided this way, which is why in some parts of the world we write this way, and in some parts of the world we write that way. So there's a sort of, on a more global scale, there's an integration happening between right brain and left brain that are integrating the more linear aspects of thinking, right? The Six Sigma, the science, with the more creative aspects. So it's almost like the science and the artists are merging. And that's what's happening. Now back to the eagle and condor reference. The shamans predicted that over the next 500 years, from about the year 1400 or 1500, I don't remember the exact date, the eagle would soar over, science would be dominant, sort of left brain would be dominant, and it would result in some great things, and it would result in some terrible things. The great things that it would result in is scientific achievements. So we would get all those scientific achievements that we all know about, the railroad, the automobile, the airplanes, and all the way now to these incredibly advanced scientific achievements, including landing on the moon and beyond. And so that was great. It was at the expense of the indigenous people, the people who operated with a different sensibility. Indigenous tribes, indigenous peoples would be destroyed, essentially, overrun. And that was the negative side. That was the other side of that sword. So, but the Andeans predicted that around the year 2000, remember the harmonic convergence, which happened around 2000, 2012, I don't remember the date, that the eagle and the condor would begin to fly together, which means that there would be more of that integration between what you might refer to as the masculine sort of left brain, even though there isn't an exact match to this. We know now through neuroscience that it's not so much right brain, left brain, but I'm going to use it as an analogy anyway, because it's easy to track with it. But that the more assertive, control, what turned out to be the patriarchal kind of energies would then marry the more receptive. So the masculine and the feminine would combine. And Daniel Pink wrote a book about it called A Whole New Mind. So if you're interested in knowing more about how that's affecting people, he wrote a book called The Whole New Mind, which posits that over the next 20 years, the more left brain types of functions like accounting and legal and all that, they're being digitized, and the game changers are going to be the people, the creatives, the artists, because the game changer anymore is disruptive innovation, and innovation is a function of creativity. So this is on a more global scale what's happening, and so it involves a complete, maybe it's the 2020 version of re-engineering, right? Which is almost like a de-engineering, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to scale back a little bit of that more linear thinking and bring in a little bit of more of that co-creative thinking. Now, there was a movement in that direction in the 70s and in the 80s in terms of interactive communication and sensitivity training and facilitation. And to a great extent, the business schools killed that off. And because they were focused more on shareholder return. But now, so there was a movement forward, then there was a movement back, and now we're really in it because more and more CEOs are getting that culture does eat strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that they really need to foster innovation. And how do you do that with people? How do you create organizations that have innovation by design instead of by default? So organizations that are on the cutting edge of this, like Google, they actually have practices of innovation. They sat around a table and they said, how do we become the most innovative company in the world? And how do we actually have our talent be innovative? And they created some practices of innovation, including one which you might find interesting, which is that they said, well, where do we have people's attention? Oh, when they go to the toilet. So they put innovation kits right in front of you in the toilet to sort of start helping you understand how to create innovation. So, David, I know I've spoken a lot here. Do you have a question? Do you want me to keep going? What would you like?
It's huge. I mean, there's so many. I'm hearing a little feedback. It sounds okay now. There's so many fascinating threads to draw on, and one is, you said in Silicon Valley they teach innovation. Earlier when we talked, you said Southern California, Hollywood has the creativity side, but not necessarily the innovation. How do you bring together those two aspects of creativity and innovation so that you have a complete system? I mean, one without the other really doesn't get us there, right?
Yeah, so that reference comes from the fact that David and I had a conversation where I was sharing with him that in a prior organization that I was working with, we sponsored a conference, and one of the people that talked was a consultant for Deloitte, the big consulting firm who basically consults to both Silicon Valley and to Hollywood. And what he told us during that talk was that what he tells Silicon Valley is you need to be more creative like Hollywood. And what he tells Hollywood people is you need to be more creative like more innovative like Silicon Valley. So here's the thing. In terms of innovation, what everybody's looking for and what has been happening is something called disruptive innovation. And so, for example, when Uber came along, what is disruptive innovation? When Uber came along, the yellow taxis were disruptive and the industry changed like that. So that's just one of many examples. You could go back and, the Xerox copiers and the, iPhone and everything just disrupted industries. And CEOs are seeing that innovation is accelerating at a great pace. And they need to be on top of that. So they're very, very interested in innovation, but most of them don't know how to do it. And so to get back to your question of how do you marry creativity and innovation, first of all, you have to be conscious about what you want to innovate about. And the true meaning of innovation is of real disruptive innovation is there's a conscious intention of actually developing something that hopefully is going to serve the world. And if it happens to disrupt, the old ways of doing things, because there are wicked problems around the world that need new ways of thinking. For example, one disruptive innovation that I heard about, I don't remember what country in Africa it was, but they couldn't afford to irrigate their lands. And so somebody came up with a very simple pump that was able to bring water, and now it completely changed the farming system in the country. And that was a disruptive innovation. In fact, some of the more expensive approaches were able to be bypassed because of this very simple, very inexpensive innovation that many farmers were subject to. So now we know that innovation has an intention. A lot of the things that have gone to market were not necessarily brought to market by the people that thought of it. The people that actually brought it to market weren't necessarily the people that thought of it. So how do you, where does innovation come from, right? And where does creativity come from? And they're very related. They're like two sides of a Janus coin, right? So in order to get creativity to happen, you have to have people thinking like artists. So I worked for Disney Animation for 6 years, and I worked with, it's almost like there was a left brain and there was a right brain. I mean, everybody was very creative in those spaces, but the producers and the production managers were very much about getting the trains in on time and providing the track for the artists to create those beautiful movies and the deadlines and the green lights and et cetera, et cetera. On the other side was the artists who were the goose that laid the golden egg. And so there was a lot of work done at Disney to make sure that those artists that their muses were nurtured so that they could deliver. And it was an enterprise, right? And so the way that was done was by giving the artists places to play, having ping pong tables, taking them, on outings, flying them to China to learn about, Mulan and so on and so forth. So it wasn't, so you have to nurture the muse, right? But that could be everybody. It's not just artists. The idea and where we're headed is that artists aren't the only creative ones, on the block. But because most people are not whole brain, and most people tilt either right brain or left brain, we have to start introducing practices and processes and programs that allow people to provide the guardrail so that people can be creative working together, okay? Creativity is an interesting thing. A lot of the inventions, a lot of the ideas that have come up in the world are by people's dreams. So dreams, as Carl Jung, the famous, philosopher, psychologist of Jungian psychology said, dreams are the royal road to consciousness. Why did he say that? Because every night when you go to bed and you have dreams, and I know most people say, I don't remember my dreams, that's because you're not doing dream work. But if you start doing dream work, especially with someone who is a master at it, as I've been doing dream work with a master dream worker here in Los Angeles for 22 years now. And I can tell you right now that what happens in dreams is A, every single one has a message for you. B, there are essentially 4 things that happen in dreams, approximately. One of them is creativity. So insights and ideas, prophecy, like it literally can prophesy the future, warnings, that person you're partnering with, that job you're about to take, not a good idea, and healing. And so paying attention to your dreams is one way of fostering your own creativity and innovation. So, the stories are legion of people who got the idea for the script in a dream. So what we've been doing in the team that I'm working with is we've been accessing a modality that was developed, I don't know how many years ago, but by someone who did this work called social matrix dreaming. And social matrix dreaming is taking groups of people, and organizations are doing this work now, not a lot of organizations, but some where they're actually leveraging the power of dreams in order to get insights and to cause innovation. Now, if I were to dial it back just a little bit and just say that the company IDEO in Northern California, which started out as, I believe they started out as a marketing or branding type of company. I could be wrong about exactly what they were doing, but they got so good at creativity that organizations began to ask them to actually develop products. And some of the products in your house right now were developed by IDEO, probably. And so IDEO came up with, they developed a process of co-creative thinking, and it eventually got a name, and it's called design thinking. And it's the design thinking process. So if you Google design thinking process, you're gonna, if you go on YouTube and do IDEO, that's IDEO, and shopping cart, you're gonna see a live feature of IDEO actually doing design thinking around how they were asked to build a new and innovative shopping cart. and you'll see their process, which is a very creative process. And so in the design thinking process, everybody has a voice. It's managed in a certain way. People are really heard. People don't talk over each other. There are ground rules and guidelines, and that results in people bringing their all and creativity actually happening. So creativity is just, it's kind of like, the way I've always expressed it is, we have this sort of flap in our heads, and there's the right brain, and there's the left brain. And most of the time, we're that left brain side, critical thinking, we're here talking, that's the flap that's open. But when you go for a walk in nature, when you go to sleep at night, when you take a shower, when you're not thinking, that's when the creativity starts to seep in. Whatever you want to call it, it's inspiration, it's divine inspiration, but that's creativity. And everybody has it. A lot of people are connected to it, but everybody has the opportunity. If you want to get more creative, you can do Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. You get the book, you start doing the exercises, you start journaling in the morning, and creativity starts to happen because you're opening up your right brain. Journaling, all of those things. David, do you want to say something? I'm feeling like you might want to jump in.
Yeah, no, I want to really go for something, because what you've been talking about in terms of design thinking, innovation, creativity, and methodology and maps to all of this, systems, processes, there's still a lot of anchors in 3D.
Totally.
And so where you started was 5D, where humans will experience oneness, radical forgiveness, unconditional love, supported by energy, dreams, purposes, unfold, all of that. That and this idea of threading the needle, the workplace is a certain way, executives are a certain way, managers are a certain way, teams are a certain way, people are a certain way, right? Clearly business, because people who've gotten to some of these positions credit their anxiety, credit their drivenness, credit, the book Good to Great, you were talking about the 90s, okay? I went back just for fun and I said, let's look at all of the Good to Great rules. There were like 7 of them. It was basically a roadmap to toxic masculinity. And so I looked at the companies they mentioned. Most of them were bankrupt, billions of dollars in litigation on environmental or human rights abuses or whatever. And I'm like, okay, clearly that wasn't working. Where does this actual transformation take place, not incremental change? And there's one other thing I just saw today. It just came across in the information. It's a headline I want to read. Before CEO's ouster for LSD use, iterable investor sold stake to Silver Lake. And I was shocked. Okay, this is a technology startup in LA who fired, it was worth billions of dollars. They had just gotten $100 million valuation. And the guy had microdosed before a board meeting and they fired the CEO. So it's like there are these two completely different, almost irreconcilable worlds. How do we cut through that kind of bullshit and have the experience in the workplace or the business setting as rich as the experience at Esalen or in the Andes or wherever you're going to be, Finhorn? How does that happen?
So slowly but surely. You said, the quick transformation. I've been at this game for 30 years and it's not quick. However, I see an uptick in it. And what's driving, I was talking about this to somebody the other day, or maybe I did a post about it the other day, that, CEOs have known for years that culture eats strategy for lunch. Or maybe they haven't known it. They've heard it, but for some reason,
Drucker Drucker said it first. I mean, that's old school.
Right, right. And I say, and I have a little statement that that uh, that culture eats strategy for lunch, and consciousness eats culture for dinner. But let's move away from that just a minute to say that as environments get more competitive and more disruptive, and as there is a shift in consciousness of younger people, okay? As director of talent management at USC, I worked with hundreds and hundreds of student interns, and now I teach those. I'm still at USC, and now I'm a professor there, and now I teach. A lot of the people that come through my classes are ages, 20 through 25, between 20 and 40, okay? And the young people are not having it. They have a different, whatever you want to joke about or say about millennial entitlement and all of that. The bottom line is that that a different consciousness is emerging, where they are more interested in social causes. They are more interested in meaning at work. They don't want to work for you if you don't have a culture of engagement. They will read about you in Glassdoor, which is the website, the site that basically has employees and ex-employees write about the company, and they give you a rating, and you want to be in the 4 to 5 range, and most of you are not in the 4 to 5 range, or in the 2 to 4 range, and they'll immediately read about you. They'll read about the CEO, and so the gig is up. And so more and more CEOs understand that they have to do culture work if they want to be successful, because culture is the soil in which the people flowers grow, and the initiatives grow, and the intentions grow. And if the culture is toxic, to use your very good word, and if it's not safe, so the buzzword today is a culture of psychological safety and civility, right? Here's the challenge. That culture change is not as simple as it looks. It isn't just about the great perks that you get in Silicon Valley, with the games and the free lunches and things like that. Culture change has more dimensions than just the people dimension. Okay, there's a model that I work with. It's called the Cameron and Quinn model. It's called the competing values framework, which says that culture actually has 4 dimensions. And this is based on a meta study of some of the most prevalent culture models used. And now this one is the one that's used on most continents on the planet and by most organizations. And it's the Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework. And that one says that there are 4 quadrants that have across this way and across this way compete and have attention. So over here is what's called clan, which is the people quadrant. That's the one that most organizations focus on, which has to do with taking care of your people, making sure that there's a culture of psychological safety, creating a transparent organization, empowering your people. That's one quadrant. That's not the only quadrant. The competing values framework that one competes with the market quadrant. So the market quadrant is the quadrant that basically says it's competitive, it's market oriented, it's customer oriented. And why it competes is, are you an employees first company, or are you a customers first company? Well, the more enlightened CEOs are getting that you want to be employees first. Why? Because if you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of your customers. Okay, so more and more companies are focusing on how do we make this a great place for employees, because we're going to get the loyalty, we're going to get the wellness, we're going to get the return on investment, we're going to get the ROI all around, right? Now this way, down here you have hierarchy. And the hierarchy culture is all about processes, procedures, organizational structures, et cetera. Each one of these quadrants is equally important. Its competing value is called adhocracy, which is innovation. Why there's a tension between these two is that when the more procedures are put in place, the more it kills off innovation, because you start having certain constraints. Now, the interesting thing about this work is that you don't necessarily want equal. You have every organization. We call it the kite, because when you plot, but there's a survey we do we do an assessment with senior leaders and with hopefully some employees to find out what the current state of the culture is. And that leads to telling us how much they're oriented around clan, how much they're oriented. And you would think, well, we want equal orientation across the board. Not usually. Because if you are a hospital that has HIPAA requirements and heavy duty compliance, you're going to want to be heavily hierarchy, but you're also going to want to be some innovative. So you want to calibrate that. If you're in Silicon Valley, you might have a different culture than if you're in Dothan, Alabama. Or you can have a culture in Dothan, Alabama that's just as innovative as Silicon Valley. But there are certain regional differences. There are certain industry, the maturity and life cycle. So let me give you an example. When IBM was the head of the pack for decades, they were innovation central. Then they grew and grew and grew and grew, and they became a lot of hierarchy because policies and procedures. It's what happens. The maturity cycle of an organization dictates where your kite needs to be, because it turns into some kind of a shape of a kite, right? And so IBM lost its edge to Apple and to Microsoft, I'm sorry, to Apple. And so Gerstner came in and said, what's going on here? We used to be the head of, the top of the cutting edge. And what happened when they did the assessment was they realized that they had lost their innovative edge. They were too much hierarchy. And so they said, we need to start getting innovative. And they started establishing practices of innovation. And they were one of the fewer companies that didn't actually go under, like so many of the companies go under after a certain life cycle, because they stayed on top of it. So they didn't go under because they managed the culture. Netflix is an organization that gets it. And they, if you can Google the Netflix PowerPoint on their culture, and you will see that Netflix has very few policies and procedures. They are an organization that wants to, they knew that when they disrupted the Hollywood system, right, with streaming, but they wanted to stay innovative. And I guess they were smart enough to know that as they grew, the extent to which their structure, processes, procedures, guidelines, rules, and regulations got bigger, their innovation would get smaller. So what they did was they have very few policies and procedures. They have very few, and you can read about it online. And so to bring it full circle, culture is the place to begin to do consciousness work in the workplace. The people that do, but the challenge is that most HR leaders do not know how to do these assessments. I was an HR leader for 35 years. Then I became a professor. Only then did I learn how to do it. I thought I knew how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I thought it was all the clan quadrant. Just take care of people and be good to people. I didn't realize that it was a more involved matrix, right? So culture is the way in. Now, even though culture eats strategy for breakfast, strategy is critically important. You got to know where you're going. And so part of the challenge of a CEO on a purely business level is to integrate strategy, culture, talent, leadership, and brand. And that's a particular model that I work with to support leaders in getting that integration, because most organizations are disintegrated. Those are not aligned in most organizations. Only some very, very sophisticated organizations are created that alignment. And that alignment is really challenging, takes years to do, but you got to get on it, because that alignment is what creates a high performance organization. So I'll stop here for another one of your probing questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, you left this with the point, sort of what is really at the cutting edge now, which is that the terms and the dialogue around competition and around performance, and this all being about performance, is still solidly within the 3D universe. And just want to say, what I'm seeing, just like culture to consciousness, that really all of this, even the dialogue around design thinking, around original, it's still very much in our heads.
You want to get into the hard stuff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing, is the condor, the lunar, the empathetic, the receptive, the genuinely fertile. is is the element that's missing. What's really wild to me is how people actually don't know how to feel. They're not actually taught to feel their feelings, and that their feelings are part of their organism, and that is just so. My belief is that performance is going to emerge from a transformation of experience, as opposed to high performance culture somehow are going to change something else. So
Okay, so let me
that's,
address that. Let me address that because
yeah.
you're spot on. Okay, it's moving from outcomes based to more about process, but not process like process redesign, but human processes of interaction, empathy, listening, and heart connection. So yes, that is the juice. That is the juice. And as I said, there was a movement to do that in the 70s and 80s with the T groups and the sensitivity training and the encounter groups. But then it was shot down by the business schools for the most part. It was seen as too touchy-feely. Well, guess what? I've said for 20 years now that the soft skills are really the hard skills. Okay. And so to your point, what we're doing now in the organization that I'm working on with this sort of secret lab that I'm working on is we're redesigning the design thinking process to include communication modalities and the different approaches to creative, what you might call channeling, like social matrix dreaming, right? Shamanic journeying, anything that gets people out of its head, drawing, artistic approaches, okay? There's a point I'm making here. And so we are coming up with a new modality to do exactly what you just said, because in order to create form, you have to be in the formless. And what that needs is a space between the notes and the whole concept of people feeling supported, nurtured, and compassionate. And by the way, you might be interested in knowing, you hit the nail on the head, because we have someone on our team who is an expert in nervous system and somatic training. And we are bringing that modality in the middle of the conversations, to not just talk about what people think, but what they feel. And we start our meetings with a grounding. We have a check-in with each person, and then we do some of the work. We do journeying to get insights. We use our own design thinking process. At the middle of a 2-hour meeting, we'll stop. We'll do another grounding. And then we apply this concept of how people are feeling. There's radical authenticity. Is that beginning to touch on what you're talking about?
100%. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. So yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I come so much from that world of hardcore business driving. That tends to be my default. But that other part of the world, right, which a number of people on my team, that's what they do. That's what they bring, right? And they're like, no, we're stopping right now and we're checking in because, and we're looking at different approaches of creating a communication, like the Quaker approach and like Native American Council. And these are groups that if one person in the tribe or in the group did not agree with something, they'd hold the process up a week. So, when I worked at Disney and I was sort of the interface in my job, I was an interface between producers and artists. And when an artist would say to me, I'm sorry, I just, I can't deliver that. And I'd say to them, the director expects to see your work by Thursday at noon. Like, you have got to show it. My muse isn't cooperating. Great, take her to the zoo. Do whatever you got to do. And so it's that, how do you generate creativity when you got to have the muse? So there's a great film with Sharon Stone called The Muse. Anybody who wants to learn the deeper messages about creativity and inspiration, go see that film. Because the message of that film, and that film is basically Sharon Stone plays a muse, and there's a Hollywood director who has lost his edge. He goes see one of the moguls and says, "Hey, give me a break. Shoot me a movie. I produced for you in the past." And the director goes, "I got nothing for." The movie mogul goes, "I got nothing for you right now." And then he goes, "Oh my God! After everything I've done and as much money as the millions I've made for you," and he said, "Okay." He goes, "I can do this. I'm going to send you to see somebody, and she's a muse, and she's going to help you to get your edge back because you lost your edge." And so And so he says, but here's the most important thing. You got to give her a gift when you arrive at her house. If you don't give her a gift, it's all over, because you got to give a gift to the muse, which is a metaphor for you have to take care and nurture that inner child, that creative, right? So he arrives at the house and Sharon Stone opens the door and goes, what? And she's testy and she's like, what do you want? And he's like, well, I was sent here by, head of Studio X. And I understand that, you can help me because I need to kind of get my edge back. And she's like, and he's like, what? And she's like, hello, meaning, where's my gift? And he didn't bring one. He forgot one. And she slams the door. Anyway, the rest of the movie goes on to display what we all need to do in order to nurture our creativity. The challenge becomes, you can have an individual, and don't get me started on frames of consciousness in the workplace. We can talk about that one later, because that's one of the most cutting edge things I think that less than 1% of the population are looking at and doing. But there's some professors at USC who have written about it, and I can talk to you about it. But the challenge is, you can have an individual who's highly creative, a total wizard and magician who produces results because of the work they've done, because of the way they've cleared all their early childhood trauma, that they are a clear and open channel, and they've learned Joe Dispenza's techniques on visualization, and they are law of attraction on steroids. But if the rest of the team isn't there, and they think he's a freak or she's a freak, then you got a problem, right? You got somebody that for themselves, they can generate and produce results like that. But how do you do that as a team when nobody invited you to teach Joe Dispenza's, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which is the name of his fantastic book? How do you do that? So you got to thread. So I'm going to circle back to your original metaphor, which you have to thread the needle very carefully. And I spent the last 30 years threading the needle very carefully, because in the 90s, when we introduced meditation to Disney animation, people were like, what the heck is this? And they literally had a problem with it. Today, nobody bats an eyelash. That's how fast it's moved. Organization, the last company I worked for had meditation rooms. What I've never understood about CEOs and very senior leaders is how they don't do their homework and know the things that are really the concomitants of productivity. The fact that taking a nap in the middle of the day actually increases productivity by X amount. The fact that when I think it was Google who told their engineers, do whatever you want on Fridays, do something creative, they got a 5,000% return on investment. And most CEOs are still operating in this Newtonian 3D model. I'm sorry, I'm a little bitter about it because I've been trying to crack that nut for 30 years. Throwing process, Six Sigma against, at everything. And by the way, I love Six Sigma and I love strategy. I think it's really important that if you're going from point A to point B, you do it as efficiently as possible, and you analyze exactly like the Toyota Muni plant, the best steps. But creativity, that's a different kind of creativity. That is a creativity, but the kind of creativity that something comes up from nothing. We have, when people say to me, what's the difference between change and transformation? I give them the example of a Dodge Ram. And I say, a change is taking a Dodge truck and adding new, shiny objects and things like that. Transformation is taking a Dodge Ram and now you have the electric car. Now you have a Tesla, okay? That's transformation. It's a breakthrough, a quantum leap. And ideally, what most executives want is that it's disruptive, which means that their product becomes the one that, they become the Uber, they become the Netflix, they become. So it's back to your, circling back to, it is about cultivating the heart. USC's mission is transformation through the cultivation of the something like transformation through the cultivation of the human mind and spirit. Okay, so what organizations need to do more and more of is less focus on the mind, more focus on the heart and the spirit. And I'm thrilled that as a professor, we're now assigning Harvard Business Review articles that actually talk about the quadrinity of spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical, and how you have to take care of all of those, because if you're not taking care of the whole person, and something's going to break, like your workers' compensation budget, So What else?
I mean, this is we're about at the end of our time, and what you just said really fills me with hope. It, that I'd expressed to you earlier that part of this work was my belief, essentially my faith, that this type of work was happening out there. Um, and my hope was that it was happening out there in many places around the world. I think we now have this opportunity for connections to be made. And it doesn't necessarily have to be senior executives in all these places. As Gen Z enters the workplace, um, you know, they're just not going to show up. They're not going to be there if the experience isn't fulfilling. Forget the work, if the experience isn't fulfilling. So I'm just thrilled that you're not just evolving these previous practices, but that you've actually assembled a team and a methodology to introduce it. And who knows how many large organizations are ready or will be ready, but my guess is a lot. My guess is that there's going to be not just an acceptance, but a willingness, an openness to basically move to 5D business from 3D business.
Can I sort of summarize with just a few
Mhm.
simple things that people can do?
Yeah, please.
So the idea is you got to move. These concepts that I've been talking about, you don't want to throw this at your CEOs
Right.
necessarily. There's much more simple ways to thread the needle that you don't have to talk about. I wouldn't necessarily talk about moving from 3D to 5D because they'd run you out of town on a rail unless you happen to have one of the CEOs that's into this. But approach it through culture. Here's the thing. David, ask me what the biggest driver of engagement and performance is. Let me ask you, what do you think it is? What is the biggest driver of engagement and performance at work? And I say engagement and performance so that we have both sides of the coin, productivity and performance and effectiveness, and we have engagement, satisfaction, wellness, and inspiration. What is the biggest driver of that?
Well, I mean, the Marianne Williamson answer is that it's love because that's the biggest driver of everything, including the Battle of Leningrad. But um, uh, beyond that, I would say it's imagine it's essentially self-respect and I'm guessing probably around acknowledgement, but
Okay,
I'm really not sure.
let me give it to you. So
Yeah, please.
everything you said, yes, and the love, the empathy, the caring. The old people don't care what you think unless they think that you care. I would call that the elixir. I would call that the fuel that makes it happen. But the root is people have unique gifts and talents, and most of them are not known, acknowledged,
Mm,
or and so Thoreau in his writing said that most people live lives of quiet desperation and go to their graves with their song still in them. I
mm,
can attest to that. Having worked in the field of employment for 40 years, I can tell you that, in my opinion, 90% of the people that go through work are waiting for Friday, not necessarily highly engaged, not necessarily effectively leveraged, because we don't live in a society that has rites of passage and initiatory experiences that would actually bless the gifts of the youth and not tell them, if you become an artist, you're going to starve, but actually would see exactly what those and nurture those. And so here's the things. If I were a CEO, would I be telling my talent management people to do? Let's start doing culture work, and I want to create a culture of engagement, and I want a full-blown culture assessment. I want to, and then we want to co-design an aspirational culture, and I want everyone involved at every level. Number one. Number two, get people involved at every level. Okay, none of this top-down thing. That's old. That's an old paradigm. Okay, Don't go off to the Ritz-Carlton in Santa Monica and do your visioning by yourself. Do like we did at the Norris Cancer Hospital, where everybody in the organization had an input into the vision through town halls, through surveys, through focus groups. We gave people 7 opportunities and they felt like they did it. And that visioning process, and we had 50 researchers and administrators in fact in Palm Springs doing a 2-day retreat, but we also got the rest of the organization in on it. So include everybody. Tell your L&D people to develop programs so that every single person has an individual development plan. And part of that plan is, what are people passionate about? What do they really want to do? Start creating a lattice of skills and talents where people can move through based on their gifts. And if what their passion really isn't that, help them leave the organization. Netflix pays people to leave the organization if they're not really cutting it or if they're not inspired by the work. And so the biggest driver of engagement is if you touch a person's sense of mission, passion, and purpose, you are gold. Then everything else is the supportive, the supportive frameworks, right? The perks, the this, the that. But that's the center point. That's the through line.
I love it. That is just so inspiring and really brings it all together, that this is experience and performance is 2 sides of the coin. Development and achievement, 2 sides of one coin. It's complementarity. If you're really focused, if the entire culture, the entire organization is for each individual's growth, development, then the rest takes care of itself. Yes, there's strategy. Yes, there's this. Yes, there's that. But those actually manifest because it is in fertile soil. It's in the fertile void. So this was super exciting to me, and one of the most encouraging conversations that I've had in quite a while.
Well, thank you for letting me, expound on some of these things. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to, further interfaces.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.